Have you ever stood in front of a statue and felt watched? As if those cold, unblinking eyes carved in stone were following your every move. I used to laugh at stories like that. Ghost tales about cursed sculptures, whispered warnings in museums, and legends carved into marble. But the night I stepped into that forgotten gallery, surrounded by rows of silent figures, I realized the truth. Statues don't need to move to terrify you. They breathe through the silence. They whisper when no one else is listening. And sometimes, if you stare long enough, they stare back. This is my story of the night I encountered sculptures that weren't just carved from stone, but from the echoes of the dead. If you think you're brave, keep listening, but once you start, there's no turning back. I never believed stone could hold life. Statues, to me, were lifeless things, cold marble, silent granite, carved into beauty or horror, but always dead. People claimed they had spirits, that they guarded temples, trapped souls, whispered when no one listened. I laughed at such stories, until the night I stepped into the gallery that time had forgotten. The building didn't belong there. It hid between two empty shops on a street nobody walked after dark, as though the town itself tried to ignore it. The windows were coated in grime so thick they looked painted black. A wooden sign hung crooked above the entrance, the letters too faded to read. The door, though heavy with rot, opened at my touch, as if it wanted me inside. The air smelled of mold and dust, but beneath it was something sharper, something metallic that clung to my tongue like old blood. The faint moonlight slipping through broken glass above revealed rows of statues lying shoulder to shoulder, stretching down a long hallway. They weren't arranged like art displays. They stood like sentries, pressed close, their shadows overlapping. The first one I saw was a woman with her face tilted upward, her mouth open in a silent scream. Her stone eyes were wide, too wide, frozen in terror. Next was a boy, no older than 10, cradling a bird with broken wings. His expression was hollow, as if grief itself had been carved into him. I moved further. A man clawing at his face, grooves cut deep into his own eyes. Another figure kneeling, lips sealed with strands of stone rope. The longer I looked, the harder it became to breathe. These weren't sculptures of beauty. They were snapshots of agony, captured mid-suffering. My footsteps echoed faintly, then vanished into the thick silence. I whispered to myself, it's just art. But my voice didn't sound like mine. It was smaller, shaky, swallowed by the air. At the center stood a towering figure cloaked in robes, head bowed over a closed book. His detail was flawless, wrinkles in the skin, veins in the hands, even the worn edges of the pages. I leaned in, fascinated despite myself. That's when I felt it, a faint breath against my cheek. Warm, alive. I froze. The air was still. Nothing moved. Yet when I looked up, the statue's head was no longer bowed. His face had tilted upward, and his stone eyes were locked onto mine. My chest tightened. I blinked once, twice. Maybe shadows played tricks. Maybe my nerves. But the gaze didn't shift. It was watching me. I stumbled backward into another statue. My hand brushed its arm. The stone wasn't cold. It was warm, like flesh. I snatched my hand away, but not before its fingers twitched. The sound came next. A low, grating scrape of stone against stone. My blood iced. I spun around, searching, but all figures stood frozen. Their shadows were fixed. And yet I knew something had moved. The boy with the broken bird. His head had turned. It wasn't facing forward anymore. It was turned toward me, his mouth stretched in a faint, twisted smile. My legs refused to run. The robed man's hands had shifted too, parted slightly as though about to open his book. A thin crack ran across his knuckles like veins. Then the whisper. Not one voice but many, layered and broken, seeping through the air. Some hissed, some wept. I couldn't make out words, but I felt them in my bones. The statues weren't silent. They were speaking. I clamped my hands over my ears. The whispers only grew louder, vibrating inside my skull. I stumbled forward, desperate for the exit, but the hallway stretched longer than before. The door was gone, or further away, or never there at all. The statues lined new corridors. Faces shifted, eyes following. One figure stood with an arm extended, a palm open like an invitation. I pushed past, choking on my own breath. The gallery grew darker until the moonlight vanished. Only pale outlines of stone glowed faintly in the suffocating dark. I tripped and caught myself on another statue, a woman kneeling in prayer, her head bowed, hands clasped. Relief washed through me until her head snapped upward. Her hollow eyes met mine, and her lips cracked open. Dust poured out in silence, spilling like ash across my hands. I gagged, coughing, tears stinging my eyes. The whispers stopped. The silence that replaced them was worse, heavy, expectant, watching, then footsteps, slow, measured. They echoed echoed from ahead, each one deliberate, steady, confident. Not mine. My chest heaved as a shadow shifted between the statues, tall, wide, moving like a predator through prey. I tried to run, but the floor shifted under me. Cracks spread like veins, pale light glowing beneath them. My heart hammered as I stumbled, and when I looked up, the robed man was no longer across the hall. He stood in front of me. His book was open now, but the pages weren't stone anymore. They were thin, stretched skin, etched with words that pulsed faintly as though alive. His lips parted. Stay! The word thundered through the walls, rattled the statues, trembled in my bones. The figures around me leaned forward as though breathing in unison, and in that moment, I understood. This wasn't a gallery, it was a prison. Every statue around me wasn't carved, they were trapped.
And I had stepped into their tomb.
The word didn't just echo, it lodged under my ribs like a shard and hummed there, steady as a heartbeat gone wrong. Stay! The robed man's mouth had barely moved, yet the sound filled the gallery, threaded through the stone, climbed my spine. The statues did not clatter or lurch, but their stillness sharpened, as if the entire hall had inhaled and was holding its breath with me. I took a step back. Ash creaked under my shoe. Another face, another pair of carved eyes was closer than it had been a moment ago. I told myself I hadn't noticed it before. I told myself many things I didn't believe. I kept my gaze from the book. Even in the dimness it pulsed. Pages not pages at all, but something stretched and thin that caught the light like skin held to a bulb. The letters writhed if I tried to look at them straight on. When I glanced aside, they settled into the suggestion of words whose shapes hurt to recognize. I dragged my eyes up and away, trying to find a seam in the shadows, a hinge in this place that would open and let me out, but the hall offered no generosity. It was long when I wanted it, short and tight when I needed space, its geometry folding and unfolding with the indifference of a tide. The whispers returned, closer now, not 1,000 voices at once, not a blur, but a thread of speech that found me as a needle finds a seam. It knew my name. It tasted it. I felt it spoken against the inside of my ear, though nothing touched me. I turned toward the sound before I had decided to. A woman's statue stood 3 paces away, her head thrown back mid-scream, every tendon in her throat carved with cruel precision. Dust trembled along the edge of her lips, the smallest movements are the ones that destroy reason. Her mouth closed just enough to drag one grain across another. The whisper came again, and this time I saw it was coming from her. Why are you here? The question was not accusation or welcome. It was astonishment softened by grief. I moved closer, then stopped, then moved again. What are you? It was the emptiest thing I'd ever said. Her eyes shifted as if whatever was behind them had leaned forward to see me better. Stone should not allow for such subtleties. Not what? She breathed. Who? The realization landed without fanfare and still knocked air from my lungs. They weren't depictions. They were conditions. Someone had been here before me and left pieces of themselves behind, not in stories or signatures, but in the very matter that held their faces. I saw the boy with the bird differently now. The blank sorrow in his expression was not a sculptor's triumph. It was a history. The kneeling figure with the threaded mouth, the man clawing at his own eyes, these were not scenes. They were sentences. I felt the robed man's attention swivel. It had weight. The air inclined toward him. I made the mistake of meeting his gaze. The sockets were cut deep, matte in the dim, as if no polish had ever touched them. In their center, though, something glinted the way a pit glints when the wind skates across it. Not light, but the suggestion of depth. He lifted the book a fraction. The hall creaked. The other statues shuddered as if their bonds tightened. Help us, the woman's whisper said, each syllable pulling dust from the cracks in her lips. I flinched. How? The robed man moved without moving. The space between us lost patience. Stay, he said, and the gallery clenched around the word like a fist. This time I understood something hidden in it. It wasn't a leash thrown only toward me. It was a net cast over the entire room. The boy's shoulders hunched as if bracing against pressure. The kneeling head jerked in small refusals. The woman's throat flexed. New fractures etched themselves along her collarbone, hairline thin at first, then deeper, as though the command pressed on her from all sides. Do not let him. A second voice rasped, near my knee, near the floor. I looked down and found the source, a figure half toppled, a man whose posture had been intended for pride, but had become the angle of a fall. One stone hand reached, the fingers all but free of the base that held him. He did not open his mouth. The sound came through fissures along his cheeks and jaw, scraped as if words had to cut their way out. Do not let him read. The book. Of course it was the book. My gaze skidded over its surface and snagged on the suggestion of a line, a sentence I couldn't bear to understand yet recognized the way you recognize a smell from childhood. My stomach turned. The whisper that knew my name threaded itself to the others, steadier now, no longer lost in the current. It burned clean through the fog. The book. I ran. Not toward him. Not away. I ran because moving felt like the only way to buy another breath. The hall permitted it for 3 strides, gave me just enough space to believe in escape, then narrowed so that my shoulders brushed stone on both sides. Faces blurred by my periphery, then resolved into terrible clarity and held. The door I had seen earlier waited where I would want it, though I had no recollection of choosing a path that led there. I seized the handle. It refused. I threw my weight against it. The wood accepted the blow and changed nothing. Behind me, the gallery extended its patience in the shape of footsteps. Slow, certain, not many, not a crowd. He didn't need to hurry. The room would do the work. Please, I said to the door, as if nature cared about manners. I slammed my palm against it until the skin burned. Stone scraped behind me in small, awful increments. I turned. The nearest figures had tilted, not quite a step, but enough to change perspective. They had been strangers moments ago. They were witnesses now. They were also, I realized, exerting themselves. The change in angle was not the glide of something freed. It was the jolt of something moving against resistance. Help us, the voices said without overlapping. The plea was singular because it had been rehearsed forever. I put my back to the door and faced the robed man. He was barely 10 paces away. The book hung open as if it had opened by itself. The air around it distorted with a heat that gave off no warmth. The letters on the nearest sheet squirmed when I looked at them head on and froze when I looked aside. The way a dying insect stills when the light touches it. His face, more masked and portrait inclined. Everything in me revolted, not at the malice in him but at the patience. Evil that could wait had found its craft. What do you want? I asked, because the human part of me insisted on forms. His mouth was not made for expressions, but something in the jawline slackened and reformed into a shadow of amusement. If the book was a chain, then the word he had spoken was the lock. He wanted nothing. Keeping was enough. The woman's whisper gathered itself into a single, threadbare command. Break it. How? The word cracked my tongue. Silence is not absence of sound so much as it is a refusal to echo. The room absorbed my question. A long second passed, then another. I realized the answer would not arrive as instructions. It would arrive as an opportunity. The robed man advanced one unhurried pace. The arc between us shrank. The book brightened without brightening. It asserted itself more completely into the world. My body made its decision before my mind did. I pushed off the door and cut at an angle. Not toward him, not away, but toward the narrow gap between 2 statues where the base had buckled. I slid sideways through, stone snagging my coat, a carved elbow biting my ribs. He pivoted to read my path, and the entire gallery shared that pivot, as if the sight of me were a handle the room could turn. The gap before me closed by a fraction. If I hesitated, it would seal. I didn't. I emerged into a sliver of floor that widened to a modest square, a kind of clearing where 4 plinths met. On one of them, a statue had been wrenched almost free. Cracks webbed the ankles. The face had lost its details to the violence of escape. What remained was the impression of effort. Its right arm was raised as if to shield against something once overhead. I recognized in that posture not fear but stubbornness. The whisper that had rasped through its broken jaw earlier came again, his tone firmer now, not with power but with decision. He cannot hold the book and hold us if he must protect himself. The suggestion arrived with the force of simplicity. Make him defend. Make him drop the lock or close it. I had no chisel, no hammer, no plan good enough to survive an explanation. I had only nerve and the kind of luck that looks like stupidity before it works. I snatched a chunk of fallen corners from the floor. It weighed just enough to promise pain if it found something I could feel, and threw it, not at him, but at the book. The trajectory was true until it wasn't. It struck a foot from my aim and shattered against a column of air that grew visible only long enough to show me what I collided with. The shockwave clipped my shoulder. My arm went numb to the fingertips. My hand betrayed me then. While it dangled useless, my eyes betrayed me worse. They returned to the text, to the shape of a sentence I should not know, and found in it an invitation I could not withstand. I stepped toward the book despite myself. The words recognized the recognition. Heat leapt. I tore my gaze away like you tear cloth that has fused to a wound. The nausea that followed was not of the body. It made memories I hadn't yet lived stagger and sit down. No, the woman's whisper pressed. Not you, not your eyes. The book will eat what looks at it, use what it cannot feed on. What do books not eat? The thought arrived bitterly. Silence? Fire? Or is it the opposite? Sound and water? I was groping in the dark inside my own skull while the room crowded. Faces teetered closer, the implied weight of their attention exhausting. The robed man extended one hand, not the one with the book. The gesture was not to take me. It was to seal the distance, to finalize the arrangement. He was about to say it again. The lock would click. Whatever small freedoms the statues had found in the corners and the pauses would vanish. A memory intruded. The first gallery I'd ever visited as a kid where the guard told me not to touch. The desire to touch had been immediate and overwhelming. You tell a body no and it wants to know what yes feels like. That was the only weapon I had left. Disobedience so instinctive it didn't require courage. I moved directly at him. He didn't expect that. I saw the surprise like a ripple under varnish. It didn't change his face, but it changed the pace at which the world reacted. I drove hard for the book. Not to grab it, that mistake needed only one rehearsal, but to hit it with the only thing I had that wasn't mine, the chunk of stone I'd scooped without thinking. When I stumbled a dozen steps earlier, a jagged wedge I'd been clutching so tightly my palm had bled around it. The wedge met the edge of the codex and did not stop. It passed through the corner as if the material there remembered being soft. I felt the resistance of tendon, the snap of parchment turned sinew, the sickening give of something that should not have shaped itself back around the wound. A sound rang out, not metal, not wood, not bone, something like a bell struck underwater. The robed man recoiled. The book lurched in his grip and tilted. For a heartbeat, it looked as if gravity were a choice it hadn't made yet. The letters stuttered. Around us, the statues lifted their heads the way prisoners lift their heads at the sound of a key in a lock. He did not drop it. He clutched tighter. For the first time, effort showed. Hairline fractures traced his wrist where the force he applied to hold the book outmatched the allowance of the stone that made him. Something had to give, and he would not permit it to be the book. His free hand shot out toward me. Not gentle, not ceremonial. He meant to close his fingers around my throat and solve the problem of me before the room found any more courage. I ducked and drove my shoulder into his torso the way you'd try to move a refrigerator when the house is on fire. I had no illusion that I could knock him down. I wanted to make him adjust. I wanted to force him to care about balance. Bodies, even impossible ones, have to honor balance. He shifted his footing. The book tilted further. The pages flooded with a sound that made my teeth ache. Do it again, the broken face whisper urged, and every syllable dragged grit. I did. I heaved. The wedge of stone in my palm sliced another corner of the codex. As my shoulder found the seam between his ribs and elbow, the room rang a second time, lower. The book folded a fraction, not closed, not open, as if indecision had weight and that weight could sag. He said it then, the second time. Stay. It didn't boom. It detonated. The gallery did not shudder, it convulsed. Cracks flew outward from the robed man's feet like lightning looking for ground. The statues seized in poses that weren't theirs and were forced to hold them. Dust leapt from every surface at once and hung suspended, then rushed in a single direction as though a vast lung had decided how it would breathe. The sound drove through me with the bluntness of a wave that doesn't care there's a body in its way. My knees slammed the floor. The wedge of stone skittered from my hand. The book snapped wider and drank the air. For an instant, through the violence of it, I saw his eyes stop pretending to be stone. Not for long, just enough. They were human in the way a storm is human when you realize the pattern of wind and destruction has a taste. Fury, yes, but also the kind of concentration you see on a craftsman's face when a tool misbehaves. He had expected to win with elegance. I had forced him to work. The statues' mouths opened in the manner of stone cracking. No sound came from most of them, but a pressure, a plea, it poured rather than spoken. It hit my chest and found a matching hollowness. I understood it without translation the way thirst understands water. We were all being pressed into shapes that weren't ours. The ceiling gave. Not a collapse, not yet, but a surrender. Sections bowing, hairline lines widening into declarations. A slab fell and shattered somewhere behind me. The echo got halfway down the hall before the word that had made it happen swallowed its tail. I scrabbled for the wedge and found instead the cold base of a plinth. The robed man's shadow erased the rest of the room. I could not win here. Not today. The thought did not invite despair. It offered a map. You do not defeat a prison by rage. You defeat it by surviving where it thinks you will break. I kicked at the plinth. Felt the old grout give, found a chunk the size of my fist and hurled it not at him, not at the book, but at the chain of cracked stone around the ankles of the almost free figure on the nearest base. The strike landed. The chain split with a dry pop. The statue wrenched its leg, and the last filament of stone that tethered him to his platform tore free. He fell to one knee, then planted a hand and rose, not smoothly, not heroically, but with the savage humility of something that has remembered it still has weight. The robed man turned his head toward that movement. For 3 beats in a room ruled by a single syllable, his attention divided. The book dipped. The letters hissed, offended. The freed statue lurched forward and put himself between us, not as a shield. Nothing here could truly shield, but as a declaration. To strike me, he must go through something newly stubborn. The floor buckled under the idea. Lines sprinted in every direction. The light thinned as dust thickened. Somewhere the door I had begged a minute ago tore from a hinge and sighed into darkness. The robed man read the room's disobedience and tightened his grip on it. A third stay gathered on his tongue like thunder on a ridgeline, but he did not lose it. He didn't need to. He lifted the book instead, and the space beneath my feet became less a place and more a suggestion. I reached for anything that was still solid, and found the wrist of the freed figure. It was like grasping warm stone brought in from the sun that didn't exist. His fingers tightened, not to anchor me to him, but to anchor both of us to the idea that we were not finished. He leaned, heaved, and swung me toward an opening I would have sworn had not been there a breath earlier, a scene where two walls fell to meet. I stumbled through as the room pitched, the roar of breakage climbing to a pitch that erased the difference between hearing and feeling. I looked back once. The robed man stood exactly where he had been. The book's pages streamed in a wind the rest of the gallery did not share. His face had no features that could smile, but his stillness announced victory in the same way a cliff announces distance. Stone faces bent toward him as if magnetized. Cracks ran through cheeks and throats and brows like lines in a palm. The woman who had first asked me why I was here held my gaze across a fog of powder. Her mouth shaped one last word, and this time I could see it even if I couldn't hear it. Run! The floor made the decision for me. It dropped. The dark wasn't a curtain. It was a pit opening its eye. I fell into it with the statue's grip tearing free from my wrist at the last instant, heat stinging where stone had held me. The word that had built this place unspooled behind me like rope cut from a mooring, and the gallery slipped upward and away. And then there was nothing to look at and nothing to hear except the hammer of my own heart and the grind of stone collapsing into a silence too heavy to be called quiet. The torrent dragged me under. My chest screamed for air as stone and water battered me in the dark. I clawed at the current, found a ledge, lost it again, until at last the river flung me forward like I was nothing more than silt in its veins. For a heartbeat I surfaced. Spray struck my face, and through it I saw her, the statue woman from the hall, no longer frozen in terror, no longer spilling dust, her features blurred by water, but her lips shaped two words before vanishing in a rush. Thank you. Then the current claimed me again, dragging me into tunnels that coiled deeper and deeper, away from the gallery, away from the robed man, or perhaps closer to him than ever. The dark around me thinned. Somewhere ahead, light waited, but whether it was salvation or another trap carved in stone, I did not know. The flood has carried me somewhere new, but in places built on whispers and curses, light is never safe. What I see next will decide if I've escaped or if I've only gone deeper into the prison.